Every week, Question Time travels to a different part of the United Kingdom. Tonight, we've come to the Gloucestershire town of Cheltenham. Famous, of course, for its annual horse racing festival. And just along from here, we also have the yearly cheese rolling race at Cooper's Hill. They've been doing this for 600 years, apparently, and we're not claiming in any way that this is a metaphor for the state of our current party politics. And our audience members arriving here this evening, as with every other week, reflect the wide range of political views and voting record across the nation. And tonight, they want to discuss the two-child benefit cap. Should we keep it or lose it? And doctors, are they really worth a 29% pay rise? Welcome to Question Time from Cheltenham. We have Heidi Alexander. She is the Secretary of State for Transport and has been for the past 6 months. Prior to that, she was a minister in the Justice Department. David Simmonds has been Conservative MP for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner since 2019. He's also Shadow Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government. For the Liberal Democrats is Jess Brown-Fuller. She was elected last year as MP for Chichester, taking a seat the Conservatives had held for a century. She speaks for her party on hospitals and primary care. Ava Evans is political editor of PoliticsJoe, the digital outlet which aims at slightly younger people. She also co-hosts their podcast, which claims to report on British politics with a sense of humour. And the journalist, commentator and also podcaster Tim Montgomerie has done what a fair number of voters have done in the last year or so. He's ended his lifelong support for the Conservatives and now backs Reform UK. Welcome to our panellists, welcome to our audience here in Cheltenham. Very nice to see you, and of course, welcome to you at home. Do join in the conversation on social media or just sit back and watch the debate going on here. So let's get started with our first question, which is from Rachel Hawthorne.
Hi. Would removing the two-child benefit cap be the right thing to do, or does it incentivise a benefits culture?
Heidi.
So the government is doing a really important piece of work at the moment to put together a child poverty strategy, which is going to report in the autumn. And I think everyone here tonight and listening tonight will realise that actually tackling poverty is at its heart about making sure that people have got good quality, well-paid jobs, and that the basics of life are affordable. And so if you look at what the Labour government has done since we were elected, we've increased the minimum wage for 3.5 million people at the lowest paid in the country, which is worth about £1,400. We're introducing things like free breakfast clubs in primary schools so that every child starts the day with a hungry mind and not a hungry tummy.
But let's just stick to the two-child benefit cap for a moment, because this was something that was started by the Conservatives. It's something that when Labour came into power, they continued with the two-child benefit cap. At the time, and this is less than a year ago, it was unaffordable to lift that cap. Now the government is considering lifting that cap. So what has changed?
So we're going to look at the evidence through the Child Poverty Task Force. I think this is a really thorny issue, if I'm honest, because
But what makes you think you can afford it now when you couldn't afford it then?
Well, look, the economy is improving. We are the fastest growing economy in the G7 in the first 3 months of this year. We've seen wages rising faster than prices. We've signed 3 trade deals. And so there really are improvements to the strength of the economy.
But the effect of the US tariffs has yet to kick in, so we don't know what will happen with the economy.
On the substantive point that you're asking me about, which is whether it would be right to lift the cap on benefits for people who have larger families. I speak to people in the town that I represent in Swindon, and many of them have said to me that they have limited the number of children that they have because they can't afford to have another child, and they feel that they're playing by the rules and they're being responsible. Now, I think around the edges, there are some really difficult issues. If you're pregnant and you're expecting one baby and you have triplets, you're acting entirely responsibly. Can you actually, afford to provide? If you're
the child benefit cap doesn't affect people who have twins or triplets.
No, but you're right, Fiona. The child benefit cap is applicable to everyone, but this relates to universal credit. The other example I would give is if you've had a larger family and your partner leaves you and you've only got one income. That's why the government is going to look at the evidence through this Child Poverty Task Force, and we will make a decision later this year about what is the most effective way to permanently reduce the number of children who are growing up in poverty, because nobody wants to see children going without.
David, the Conservatives want to keep the cap. Why?
£26 for the first child and 17 for the second and subsequent is not a huge amount of money for many household budgets, but it's also coming at a huge cost to other taxpayers. And the view that my party took when we were in office is the best way to lift children out of poverty is to help their mums and dads to get a good job. There were 4 million more people in work when we left office. The level of youth unemployment had halved. All of that had really helped to address the issues which Heidi has quite rightly described. I think in the long term, if we think about the work my party is now doing in opposition, thinking about the future challenges that we face, I think we would all agree cross-party that we need to look at better ways of lifting children out of poverty. That's about skills. It's about helping parents who want to work more hours to do that. It's about helping mums and dads with disabilities to get back into the workplace. And all of those are strategies that we looked at when in government that were beginning to take effect. Now, I think it's positive that the government are looking at taking many of those things forward. But what we need to avoid is a situation where we're asking more and more taxpayers to bear the costs of the benefits bill. It's simply not fair to other people. And most of us as mums and dads need to think about how are we going to fund the cost of the children that we want to bring up and bring into this world. And that's a reasonable expectation.
So when Rachel says, does it incentivise a benefits culture, do you think it does?
But there's always a risk with any form of benefits that that's an issue. But we need to make sure that families get the support that they need when they're in a situation, and that's balanced off against what we're asking other people to pay. We already have a situation where the majority of people in the UK who are taxpayers are actually getting more out of the system than they're paying in. And we need to make sure that work pays, that families are able to support themselves, and that we have an economy that can fund the kind of public services that we want to see in this country.
Man there in the check shirt.
As a lifelong Labour supporter, I'm really pleased to hear what Heidi has to say. And I really hope this is Labour refinding their moral compass and not toffing their hats to the Reform Party and to Nigel Farage. Exactly as the Conservative gentleman has just discussed, it is the best way of taking children out of poverty.
Yeah, but the Conservatives don't support that policy.
Well, he should support it.
He said it's not the best.
It is the best way, whether they...
You support keeping the two-child benefit.
Yeah, otherwise they would have taken it out. But it is the biggest way and the best way of increasing the livelihoods of young people growing up in our society, and we have a responsibility to them.
OK. Man there.
We've been told that the economy is improving, and that may be able to fund this. Is the economy improving sufficiently so it can also fund a U-turn on winter fuel allowance? And is it improved sufficiently to stop there being more tax increases in the winter budget?
OK, I will come to that. Tim.
The most powerful force for good, I think, in society is the love of a parent for their children. I know for my own mum and dad, it's an amazing love that makes society stronger in 101 different ways. But at the moment, so many parents, so many would-be parents, feel that they can't afford to have children. Now, probably the biggest reason is house prices. House prices are probably the biggest, most powerful contraceptive imaginable. But it's not the only reason. And I have a lot of sympathy with what David has said. People who are earning money that hasn't come easy to them, perhaps they do object to people on benefits receiving help to have children when they may have made a decision that they can't afford more children. But what interesting fact is, and I think this is why Nigel Farage has taken the position that he has, is that 59% of the people that would benefit from lifting the cap are actually in work, but they also receive benefits to top up what are inadequate incomes. So I don't think it's as simple, actually, as saying this is a policy to help people on welfare or not on welfare. It's a policy to help people to actually do what they most want to do. It's a natural human instinct to bring children into the world. But we in the West have made it incredibly expensive. And one of the saddest things, I think, at the moment is that so many young people are deciding not to have children, not because they don't want to have children, but they just don't think that they can afford it. And so this is only a small step towards helping address that issue, but I think it's a necessary one. And I hope the gentleman there is disappointed that maybe it's come from Nigel Farage first. But I hope what will happen in this policy is I think Labour are moving in this direction, and it's the beginning of a policy to address the fact that at the moment, as a country, we will die out. We aren't producing anywhere near enough children to keep our population stable.
Now, lifting the two-child benefit cap was one of a number of things Nigel Farage proposed this week, all of which were going to cost a lot of money. That was greeted with some scepticism amongst economists who said it might leave a gap of the size of possibly 100 billion in the public finances. Now, you're a supporter of reform, but I know you think those numbers don't add up either.
Well, look, we're 4 years away, or 3 or 4 years away from a general election. If reform have any chance of forming the next government, it will have come in the context of, first of all, David's party, the Conservative Party, failing in office, and probably Labour as well. And I think voters probably elected Labour last time, not with a great sort of awareness of what they were voting for, but because they'd rejected the Conservatives. I don't think that will happen with reform. I think what you will expect, rightly, is you'll kick the tyres incredibly hard.
But what about the numbers, Tim?
What I'm saying is that by the time of the next election, we absolutely have to answer the question that you have asked. But
what's your opinion? Because, well, I know what your opinion is because you spoke about it this week. You said, as far as you're concerned, the numbers do not add up at present.
I don't think they do at the moment, but it's also, if you look at... So this is a policy that will cost £3 to £4 billion. What we don't know is COVID cost this country £350 billion. We're about to spend £150 billion on building up our army over the next 10, 15 years. Bank bailouts cost £25 billion. This is small change. It's not fair to ask a party 3 years out from an election to do all the numbers now without knowing the context in which we'll be taking decisions.
Yeah, but it's not unreasonable if a party suggests it's going to raise the income tax threshold to 20,000, if it's going to reintroduce the winter fuel payment, if it's going to lift the two-child benefit cap, to have some idea of how it might find the money for that. And I know you said you don't think those numbers add up.
Well,
and that's your comment on it.
There are policies that... So, for example, when Nigel Farage did his press conference this week, he was asked, will you reinstate the triple lock, which pensioners receive? And he refused to answer that question. Now, you can draw your own conclusions about that. I just think, Fiona, generally, I criticised... When I joined Reform, I said to Nigel Farage, are you sure you want me? Because I was a pain in the butt for the Tories, and I will speak honestly, as I've done on your part.
As you have done.
But I think it is unreasonable to ask 3 years out from an election for all the numbers to be set out in a spreadsheet now.
Jess, let's get back to the question. Since you were here, I want to ask you about that. Would removing the two-child benefit cap be the right thing to do, or does it incentivise a benefits culture?
Yeah, so Rachel asked if it incentivises a benefits culture, but actually removing that child benefit cap does the opposite, because we know that children that don't grow up in poverty are less likely to have additional health needs, are less likely to rely on a welfare state as an adult, are less likely to have poor educational outcomes. There are 4.5 million children in this country that are currently living in poverty. I believe that we have a duty to pull those children out of poverty so that they do better in school, so that they can go on and get jobs and contribute to the economy. They didn't choose to be born into a larger family, and they all deserve to succeed. And that's why my party have been campaigning to remove the two-child benefit cap since it was introduced in 2017.
OK, Ava, I'll come to you in a second. I'm just going to hear a little bit more from our audience. Yes, the woman there.
Are we going to be like China, having one-child situation when they have only one child?
Yeah, I mean, I think they can have 2 now, but for years they could only have 1. I'm not sure that anyone here on the panel is suggesting they only have 1 child, but it's an interesting point. Yes, the woman there with the sunglasses on her head.
Yes, is it not the case that Reform will just say whatever is popular to get the votes, with no backing, with no numbers? Again, this is what Nigel Farage does through every campaign.
Okay. But I'm just coming right a minute. Man with the blue check shirt.
Is it time to look at absent fathers and see if they can contribute to some of this money to raise the children out of poverty?
And can I just check, Ava, I'm going to come to you. I just want to... Is there anyone here who supports the two-child benefit cap? Anyone at all? In keeping it? OK, right, well, let's hear from a couple of you then. Yes, the man there. You said yes, absolutely. Yes.
Well, as Izzy said before, if you can't afford to have children, don't have children. Simple as that. The taxpayer shouldn't be paying for you to have 3, 4, 5 kids. It's got to stop somewhere.
Who's going to look after you when you're older, though?
Sorry?
Who's going to look after you when you're older, if we don't have more children?
My younger partner.
And the man behind you, I think you stuck your hand up as well. Did you, with the glasses? Yes.
I think there's a danger of disincentivising people to have jobs. If they're on the margin, then why work?
Right. Ava.
Do you know that it's only £20 a week and then £17 for the additional child? It's not... I wouldn't go into having a third child for £17 a week. I mean, it works out at about £1,000 a year, you know. I could think of other ways I could make money, probably. So I just want to counter...
What an interesting way to start your time on Question Time.
I work for a youth brand. Anyway, I just want to counter a few things that David has said there. David said that it's not the best way to counter child poverty. I want to totally disagree with him. Gordon Brown put out a report last week, which actually should have come from Labour, but Brown had to put it out because Labour refused to put out their long-awaited child poverty report. And he revealed that there will be 1 million children who could be lifted out of poverty just by adjusting these child benefit measures, the two-child benefit cap, sorry. The second thing is about taxpayer money. It will cost the taxpayer £3.5 billion, but it will save the taxpayer £40 billion in measures that are put in place to prevent these children from, from what do I even say? I don't want to say dying, but honestly, this is really where we're at. We're talking about children. I've got friends who are teachers. My sister is a teacher. Children are going to school every single day hungry, and they may not be eating lunch at school because they don't have enough money for lunch. And then when they get home, their parents are splitting their meals between perhaps 3 or 4 children. I think the least we could do on a moral point is allow these parents to have an extra £17 a week so that a child doesn't go hungry.
Let me come back to you, Heidi. Because the man said, you say the economy is improving sufficiently to... Is it improving sufficiently to pay for lifting the two-child benefit cap, reintroducing the winter fuel payment? To what extent, we still don't know. And no future tax increases. Is it improving that much?
Well, that's the work that the Chancellor is going to have to do over the next couple of months before she delivers her autumn budget. We were clear when we had the budget last year that that was a once-in-a-parliament type of budget. We committed in our manifesto not to increasing income tax, national insurance for working people, not putting up VAT, apart from getting rid of the VAT exemptions for people who send their children to private school. We're sticking to that commitment because we know that times are still really tough for people in terms of the cost of living. The Prime Minister has obviously made clear that he would like to see more pensioners eligible for the winter fuel payment beyond those who are receiving pension credit at the moment. That is in light of the brightening economic outlook, but we need
Nothing
to make
do with
sure
the local election results.
we need to make sure that we've got the money there to pay for it, because we do know that when we walked into government, we inherited an abject mess when it came to the public finances. Conservative ministers spending beyond their means, and we had to do something to bring the budget into balance in year. And so that's why we took difficult decisions, but necessary decisions, because we couldn't risk a repeat of what happened under Liz Truss when the markets lost confidence in the government. We saw interest rates soaring, and it was ordinary people who were paying the price through increased mortgage payments and increased rents. And this government was never going to risk that.
OK. I'm going to move on. But before I do, I just want to tell you where we are going to be next week. We are going to the lovely North Wales coast, to Llandudno, and the week after that, we're off to the Lancashire coast, to Fleetwood. So if you live in or near either of those two places and you'd like to come and be part of the Question Time audience, go to the website, apply there, and hopefully we will see you, Llandudno or Fleetwood. OK. Lewis Howard, where are you sitting? Right, let's hear from you.
Is the latest pay demand by doctors of 29% justified, or will it put UK PLC into permanent life support?
David, I'm interested in what you have, because your wife is a doctor. and also you've sat on an NHS trust. So just to remind us, there was a very long strike. I'm sure you all remember 44 days of industrial action over a year and a half during the last government, one of the longest industrial disputes in history. That was resolved by the current government very soon after they got into office, and doctors were offered a pay rise of 22% over the past 2 financial years. The doctors now want 29%. Is that justified?
The NHS as a body is pretty efficient at what it does. You know, the healthcare that we receive and the outcomes that we get as a country are pretty good. But this pay dispute is part of a bigger picture that we can see going on. Now, we know the independent assessment says all of the growth in the economy, all of it, is down to rising household bills. And we also know that the government's level of borrowing to bridge the gap between what it's raising in tax and what it's spending is getting bigger and bigger. £20 billion last month alone, a huge record. So I think the question is absolutely going to the heart of a problem. Now, I know there's been a lot of debate in Parliament about the way the government have approached government payroll pay deals, that we've seen record pay awards, 12-13% for train drivers, people like that, with nothing in return in terms of improved efficiency and public services. So we need to make sure that we're getting value for money for the taxpayer.
So is the 29% pay increase, the demand that's coming from the British Medical Association, is that justified?
It's not affordable. I think that's the bottom line. Doctors are a really important part of our workforce, as are nurses. It is right that we see increases in pay over time. But that level of pay rise at a time when the national finances are under a degree of strain is simply not fair when there are lots of other priorities that we need to address at the same time.
Can I just interject there slightly? So I don't know if any of you have seen, but Robert Jenrick today, who perhaps might be the next leader of the Conservative Party, has been in a London train station complaining that no one is seizing these people who aren't paying their full fare. They're avoiding their tickets, and he's really furious about it. And what's really interesting about that is that they cut all of the ticket inspectors and they cut all of the police that were meant to man these stations.
And we put the staff on the platform to address it directly, which is where they needed to be.
Can you believe that these train drivers are getting more money? Or can you believe that people want more cash? Listen, you're the king of cuts. Like, I think basically we can stop here and we can basically just assume that they don't want to pay for anything, but they want the same level of service.
But as a country, we need to live within our means, and that's the bottom line.
So, Ava, if the doctors were, I mean, one of the reasons the doctors give for wanting 29% pay rise on top of the 22% is they're saying we want to take our pay back to what it was in 2008. And they feel they've lost out on that. When you look at public sector pay over that period, it's been pretty much flat for all public sector workers.
Absolutely.
Over that period. So why should doctors get 29% as opposed to anyone else?
Well, can I present you the alternative, which is that these NHS doctors decide that they're going to move to Australia or they are going to move into the private sector, and then the government has to pay the private sector to have those same doctors working back in the NHS hospitals. It is totally nonsensical.
I do think that Ava is right to say that the NHS actually operates in a global market when it comes to staff, and actually doctors can get jobs abroad, and that is something that we do need to consider as a government. You know, I understand why junior doctors, resident doctors want to see their pay restored to the level it would have been at if it had gone up with inflation. But we can't afford to do that at the moment, is the truth of the matter. So what they have had in terms of the pay increase last year, which brought an end to those strikes that were ravaging the NHS, if you look at the last 3 years, it would have been in effect a 29% pay increase. It's a 5.4% pay increase this year. We're also giving, over the last 2 years, a £2,000 pay increase to a Band 5 nurse. And we're actually recognising the contribution that people across the public sector make, our teachers, our prison staff.
OK, but coming back to doctors, do you think when it comes to the demand for 29%, do you think they're justified, they should get it, but the country just can't afford it? Or do you think they're asking for too much?
I think they're asking for too much now. Because we can't, and Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has appealed directly to junior doctors, resident doctors, to work with him now, because we do need to turn the NHS around. We have given those very significant pay increases. I think there was public sympathy for the junior doctors being on strike when they were getting below inflation pay rises. But we are in a different world now. We've got a new government that's determined to work with them.
Can I just ask, because often we do have people from the NHS here in the audience, have we got a doctor in the house? Aha! Right. What do you think? Is this 29% pay rise justified?
I find myself in a very difficult position with this discussion. First thing I'd like to say is the 22% that everyone's bandying about is a very general figure. We didn't all get that. I got a 1.29% pay rise last year, and originally the government offered me 0, and the BMA advised me to accept that. I've been a doctor for 31 years. I'm at the top of my pay scale. And because I'm in a closed grade, the thought was that I'm worth no more money than I was 12 years ago. Because it is a fact that, sadly, under the previous government, we had pay restraint, which resulted in effectively 0% pay rises for 10 of the 12 years. So our pay did fall significantly behind comparable professions. We had a pay review body that wasn't independent. It is more independent now, although it still accepts as part of its terms of reference what the government can afford.
So you're saying you're in a difficult position when it comes to 29%.
Because
why? Do you not support it?
Resident doctors, as we now call junior doctors, received a fairly significant pay deal over the last 3 years. When I was a resident junior doctor a very long time ago, I was paid significantly less than them. Times have changed.
It sounds to me like you're working your way towards saying you don't support it, but you feel uncomfortable doing so.
I've got to be very difficult what I say, because I have a lot of colleagues, and I also am a BMA representative.
So come on,
so
listen, you stuck your hand up.
I did.
Is the 29% pay rise justified or not?
I think the aspiration of junior doctors, which is to get back to pay parity, so to have their pay restored to where it should be, is laudable and is completely fair. Over what time period that's achieved is really what's up for debate. So, yes, I would agree that pay should be restored. Whether it's restored very quickly, I agree, is probably unrealistic.
All right. The man at the back with the glasses.
I've got a lot of family and friends that are either trained to be doctors or early years doctors, and a lot of the time they're being dragged all over the country to take on jobs that they can't either get at home, or just as part of their training they have to go to the other end of the country, away from their family and support systems. Is it not fair for them to at least get pay parity with what they were on 15 years ago?
OK. Man here.
I'm in a similar situation. I've got friends who are junior doctors, and the reason that they're considering moving abroad or leaving the profession entirely is purely because of the pay they're getting and the conditions they're working under. Hospital roofs are leaking, there are insufficient beds, and they can go and work abroad in a hospital that's kitted out with the latest equipment, and they know at least that their patients aren't going to get wet from a leaking shower upstairs. That's why junior doctors are leaving the NHS, not because the politicians are conflicting with them.
And do you worry about whether the country can afford it?
Of course it's a concern, but isn't health of the population one of the most important factors when considering government policy?
Jess, this is absolutely your area, in terms of hospital and primary care. Is the 29% pay justified? Do the Lib Dems support it?
It's a good question, and I'd need to see the figures to work out whether that feels affordable. I think...
But you must be across it. This is your brief. So do
absolutely.
You, and as spokesperson for the Lib Dems on hospitals, that's the doctors we're talking about, do you support it?
Do you know what I support? I support making sure that all of our doctors and support staff working in hospitals can go to work and, like the gentleman said, work in a hospital where they haven't got...
Do you support it? Well, this is your policy area. Do you support it or not?
And what I support is the government should be focusing on getting the 40 new hospitals that the Conservatives promised and were never going to deliver actually built. And I support making sure that the hospital estates work and function so that people aren't giving birth in rooms where the ceiling's falling down.
Is that an answer to the question?
Coming down through the ceiling.
No, come on, Jess, put your money where your mouth is. Yes or no?
I think I'd have to look at the figures, but it feels like a big number. It feels like a very, very big number.
Someone say I'll take that as a no. Tim?
Well, sometimes I'm glad that I'm a pundit rather than a politician, because some of the decisions that people like Heidi make are incredibly difficult. And the fact is, over the next 25 years, Britain's going to have to find £200 billion extra in its budget to pay for our ageing population. I could mention a whole range of other pressures that are going to be on the public finances. We're an old country, frankly, and at the moment, the danger is, if you look at the size of the British state, we could look to... The NHS takes an ever greater percentage of our national income and the tax take. And in the future, we may sort of look like a country which basically has an NHS, a pension system, and perhaps an army attached to it. What that means for schools, local government, etc., is real. And these are the decisions that people in government have to wrestle with all of the time. And so, look, we all love doctors, of course we do. But there was an independent pay review body. You were very honest, I think. You didn't quite say it, but I think reading between the lines, you know it's unaffordable what your colleagues are asking for. This independent pay review body has said the junior doctors will get something more than nurses, more than teachers, and yet they still want more. And doctors are great, but they have a lot more security, a lot better pensions than other people who actually have to tour the country for their jobs as well. People in the private sector earn an awful lot less. It has to be about give and take. And Ava's right to say, yes, we're in an international global market, but actually our doctors are paid in a similar way to most other doctors in Europe. So it's about affordability. And at some point in the next few years, if we're not careful, we'll be going cap in hand to the IMF again. We have to start taking tough decisions, and I'm afraid this is probably one of them.
All right. Let's take a couple more points from the audience. Man at the very back with his hand up in the blue shirt.
Asking for so much money at the same time that the government is cutting 50% from NHS England, 50% from the local ICBs, there's going to be no management left. I mean, the extra money is going to have to go towards the doctors managing the work themselves.
All right, and this man here.
Yes, I'm curious to know when will any party of any description, any flavour, come to the realisation that there's no upper limit with the spend on the NHS, number one. And whilst we all want to remain healthy, thank you, I think it's part of the fact that we need to manage expectations. We can't fix everyone all the time for everything. So expectation management, what is the NHS here for now? Not what it was there for in 1948 or whenever. I think that's missing from the discussion. We should continue to review what it's here for and what it should do. And yes, doctors should be paid what they deserve and worth.
Maybe you're grimacing or some of that.
Am I misunderstanding you? I thought you were suggesting that we should decide who lives or dies. Am I misunderstanding that? You're saying that the health service can't provide what it did after Attlee's government, and so now we have to...
OK, let's let him answer.
Yeah, yes, you're completely misunderstanding.
What were you saying? Sorry.
I'm saying we should make a decision along the next few years about what it can and can't do.
But then that's sort of leading into privatisation, and I really do think as a country we need to be very wary about the sort of bad faith actors who are advertising privatising the NHS, because I promise you there is not a politician out there who is not doing it for personal financial gain.
Sorry, do you just want to clarify that? Ava, who are you talking about?
Well, look, I cannot imagine that a single... OK, right, if we're going to be frank, there are many...
Frank and not libelous, obviously.
Frank and not libelous. I've done this before. I think that you should be very wary when a politician is advertising moving into the private sector, because typically people who would like to push those sort of beliefs or ideas...
You're talking about like private insurance policies,
private
that kind
insurance
of thing.
policies. It doesn't work. Health is a monopoly. And if it was your family member that was being told you've either got to pay a deductible of £100,000 or you're going to die, you would be pretty furious that a politician convinced you into voting for private healthcare. It doesn't come without some sort of back pocket reward, and I think that we should watch very carefully at the sort of politicians who are advertising private healthcare at this point.
OK. Who are you talking about exactly?
Well, now we're going to stray into libelous.
Well, it's either true or it's not true. Stand by your allegation or don't.
OK. I'm going to be careful.
OK, I shall leave it there. Let's move on. Let's move on.
But you might...
Let's move on. No. Let's take another question. OK, Heather Dallow, there you are, in your yellow cardie. Let's hear from you.
Do the police have the resources and finance to manage early release prisoners, and are victims of crime being denied justice?
So, Heather, what you're referring to, of course, is last week the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, announced plans where some criminals will serve a third of their sentence rather than a half if they behave themselves. There's going to be a mass expansion of tagging, electronic tagging, almost 40,000 as opposed to the current 9,000. Some people who are given 12-month sentences may not, in fact, serve that time in prison. And some victim support organisations, domestic violence organisations have expressed a lot of concern about that. Jess?
So Heather asks, do the police have the resource? In short, no. Neither does the probation service. They are buckling under the strain of trying to look after offenders that are out on the street. And I see it in my local area when somebody comes out of prison serving a short sentence, shorter than they were sentenced for, the police then spend the few weeks following them around until they reoffend again, and they go in and serve a few weeks for reoffending. So no, they don't have the resource, and this is really concerning for police forces up and down the UK and probation services that are trying to do a good job and can't do it because of the resources that they've got. When it comes to sentencing, I mean, this is a particularly personal area for me. My uncle, when I was a teenager, was beaten to near death. He never came out of a vegetative state from the attack that happened by 3 men, and I will not name them because they don't deserve their names spoken. And one of them served 3.5 years of his 7-year sentence, and he was released on the anniversary of the date that he ended my uncle's life and took my uncle away from his two children. So, no, they don't have the resource. Yes, we are failing victims, and we have to get this right.
And do you, given the bind the government says it's in terms of lack of prison places and lack of building of prisons, what alternative do you see to letting prisoners out early?
We need to do both. So we need to increase the prison estate, and I'm very aware that Heidi will say that we are focusing on releasing the prison estate, but also what we need to do is put victims at the heart and the centre of every decision that is made. So I will welcome quite a few things that were in that sentencing review, especially the campaign that one of my colleagues was running to make sure that domestic abuse could be listed as an aggravated assault. Labour have taken that up. So now when there is early release schemes, there will be a flag so that those that have been victims of domestic violence, that will come up. When we're supporting victims, my colleague Sarah Olney has been campaigning since 2017 to make sure that victims of rape can have access to free court transcripts. They couldn't, they were being charged thousands of pounds. Now they can because Labour have picked that up. So there are definitely things that I welcome in the sentencing review. But there was no impact assessment that was done with the police as to whether they can cope.
Well, let's talk about that, Heidi, because you've got police chiefs from 5 of Britain's biggest police forces basically warning that when it comes to key elements of the Labour manifesto, so halving knife crime, halving violence against women and girls, they're not going to be able to do that on the resourcing they have and with prisoners being let out early.
So I think what is being referred to here is the letter that was sent to the Justice Secretary by the Met Police Commissioner Mark Rowley and others before she announced, before David Gork, who was doing an independent sentencing review, published his report. And many of the issues that they were talking about in that letter have been addressed. For example, in terms of early release of prisoners, this won't apply to people who have committed murder, have got a life sentence, you know, for anything related to terrorism offences or require a parole board decision.
But it will hang on, Heidi, it will refer... OK, but they talked about halving knife crime, and not all people who commit knife crime murder somebody. And when it comes to violence against women and girls, domestic abusers will be released early.
Yeah, and look, anyone who is deemed to be particularly dangerous by a judge can be excluded from this scheme as well.
But their point is specifically about that. Do you think they're wrong about that?
Well, look, 2 points. First point, this government will always make sure that the police have the resources that they need to do their job properly. We increased the policing budget by £1.2 billion last year, taking it up to over £17 billion. And we're also investing in building prison places because the last government, despite the prison population doubling over the last 30 years, the Conservative government added a net of 500 extra places. And one of the reasons why Rishi Sunak called that early election last year was because he knew that we were weeks away from running out of prison places.
OK, but just to be clear, Heidi, hang on 1 second, because you say we've given the police the money they need. So when you have the head of the Metropolitan Police saying we want to do all the things the government committed to a year ago, we can't do that without more money. Is it that he's not spending it properly, or you're not giving them enough money?
So look, we increased the amount of money that the police had. We're going through a spending review process at the moment, and I'm giving your viewers the commitment that this government will always make sure that the police have the resources that they need. We injected £200 million into the policing budget within that £1.2 billion uplift, precisely so that they could invest in neighbourhood policing, new police officers, police community support officers, special constables, because we know that the priority of the public is to see the police back out on the streets, in the community, in our town centres, where we see unacceptable levels of behaviour. But the point is, Fiona, we've got to invest both in the prison estate. We've put £4.7 billion into building new prisons, but we've also got to find a way of making sure that when people come out of prison, they are better citizens and not better criminals, because sadly that is what is happening at the moment.
Woman here in the front.
We seem to be letting people out of prison early because we don't have enough space in prisons. Why are we then putting people into prison for tweets, social media, that has no violence, that has not had anything to do with guns or knives or any form of violence whatsoever? And these are mums who have an opinion, all down to free speech. If we're going to let people out of prison, should we not be releasing those people out of prison?
I mean, you're talking about them in the plural. I think you're referring to someone in the singular, which is Lucy Connolly.
Yeah.
And she didn't advocate knife crime, you're quite right. But what happened is, in the aftermath of the Southport, horrible Southport attacks, there's lots of conjecture as to who might have been responsible, and she made some very, very offensive comments about burning down a hotel which housed asylum seekers. So that's who you're talking about. Woman at the back. Yes, you've got a stripy top on.
I was very reassured to hear that Heidi takes law and order seriously, and as part of that would protect women. So I'm curious to know whether you would support chemical castration for sexual abusers and rapists.
Do you support it?
Yeah.
Wow, that was quick. How come?
I really feel, I know there's a lot of talk about making the country safe for women. I've got a teenage daughter. She doesn't feel particularly safe. And looking recently at an article of news, there was a whistleblower in the police, called out a colleague who was, spouting off about women. And it just seems that we've been talking about making Britain a safer place for women for a long time. And, from personal experience and that of my friends, I wouldn't say it's necessarily anything's changed. So I think we need drastic measures.
OK. Let me hear from this person in the front. Yes, with the glasses.
Surely one of the biggest problems is the extremely high reoffending rate, which I believe is about 60%, something like that.
It's not quite that. It's about 27.5, which is considerably less, but still pretty high.
Oh, I saw a figure higher than that. But there is a serious problem, because when
undoubtedly.
prisoners get out, they're just left to their own devices and they've no way of starting a new life.
Tim?
I'm not going to criticise Heidi or Labour for what they have had to do, because the fact is the prison estate was overcrowded. But let's not understate the significance of who is being released. I saw, I think, on Sky News recently, a woman who learnt that the person who'd abused her, had beaten her, was coming out of prison early. She was attaching extra locks to her windows, to her doors, and you could see in her eyes incredible fear. So it's entirely understandable why Labour have had to do what they have had to do. But it isn't just our prison population that isn't being looked after properly. There's a massive drugs problem in our prisons. We turn a blind eye to it because we don't have the resources to deal with that drug problem in our prisons. And if we don't deal with that drug problem in our prisons, any chance of our prisoners being rehabilitated is gone. Every week in London, there are marches where anti-Semitic attacks are made, but the police don't intervene because they worry that the march becomes a riot. Businesses all over this country are being shoplifted from on a regular basis, and the police are hardly there to support them. Ava mentioned Robert Jenrick's video about fare dodging. I see it all the time in London on the tube. This cannot go on. It's not the country I have lived in for most of my life. We were a law-abiding country that pushed back on people who did criminal and other acts. And we have to have this. The first duty of the government is law and order and defence of the realm.
And do you think the answer is, Tim, do you think the answer is putting more people in prison then, despite the situation that the prison
I think
state
we
is
have
in?
to prioritise law and order again.
But what does that mean? Does that mean putting more people in prison than we are at present?
It means more police resources. It means more prison population. It means more investment in rehabilitation. It means becoming a law-abiding nation again. Because what we're teaching at the moment, young people, is, maybe it's just a tube fare they evade at first. Maybe it's just an anti-Semitic remark they can make on a march. But they're beginning to think the state is weak, that we are weak as a society. And if we don't start pushing back, the fame reputation we used to have as a law-abiding country will be gone. And people will leave this country in big numbers. Law and order has to be prioritised. Okay. Labour have made a quick decision, understandably, but I don't see any long-term strategy to deal with these problems.
David?
Well, Tim and I probably feel the same way about this, but behind the sentiment about law and order is what do we do about it practically. And I think it's good that the government are now looking very much more about what risks individuals present. How do we make sure that the right people are in prison for the right periods of time? Have we got sentencing correct? And often this is because...
Do you think it wasn't correct under the previous government?
There have been many occasions when I think politicians under pressure because an incident has happened, there's a great deal of public fear, have responded with harsh sentences and then realised that's out of balance with the existing law. So people end up locked up that the public feel shouldn't be there, and that's an issue we need to address. But we also need to think about risk, and I think that's the concern that's been highlighted, that the organisations have said there are people who are being put on the streets, who could stay in prison. The new prisons that started under the previous government will be finished by this one, which we all welcome, are coming on stream. There are people who could stay in prison, but who present serious risks to the public, who will be released. And what we need to make sure is that each of those people who's put out of prison, we understand who they are, where they're going, and what risks they pose to other people before that happens. And that's why we need to make sure we aren't taking chances with this, with a wholesale early release scheme, as I'm afraid it feels like at the moment the government is doing for financial reasons.
The Conservatives had an early release scheme as well. I just think it's worth mentioning that Rishi Sunak did have one.
So, Ava, let's hear from you. Do the police have the resource and finances to manage this early release? And is justice for victims really being served?
No, and I really worry about people who are victims of domestic abuse, who might have their partner released early and perhaps there aren't the checks and balances in place that means that that person is notified, the victim is notified before that person is back on the streets. But, I think this all, I'm really sorry to do the Labour line here, but it does come back to Conservative cuts. During austerity, the MOJ had their funding cut by over 30% and they had to close over 250 courts. I think there's around 17,500 people at the moment, which is out of a prison population of around 90,000, who are on remand. So they don't actually have a court date yet, and it's because the courts are so backed up. So the reason that you've got this huge issue in prisons is because you can't get people through the court system, and then we don't have time to get into probation, but it all comes back to cash. And I do think, we don't have time for it now, but we perhaps need to have a more moral conversation about how we are spending taxpayer money. Do we want £100 million going to the Chagos Islands, or do we want that money spent in-house at home?
OK. All right. I'm going to try and squeeze in this last question. We've got about 10 minutes. It deserves longer than that, but I'm sure we will revisit this subject. Ben Newton, let's hear from you.
Are sanctions really the best we can do when faced with mass starvation and thousands of babies dying in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know if it's thousands, we don't know the number, of course. But the situation in Gaza is clearly horrific for individuals. Israel is defending its right to take the action that it is taking. The government has done a number of things, imposed sanctions on some West Bank settlers' organisations. It's suspended some arms licences, but allowed others. It's called the Israeli UK ambassador to the Foreign Office. Is that the best we can do, Tim?
I remember watching you, Fiona, after the October attacks in Israel, that question time. It's one of the most charged question times I can ever remember. What happened to Israel on that day was beyond horrific. And I have always been a defender of Israel. What the Jewish people have suffered in history is unconscionable. But I can't understand anymore what Israel is trying to do. I think what I would do if someone hurt my mum or someone who I loved, and now Israel, you see families where a man has lost everyone in their family, generations wiped out.
And is there more that the government can do? Does it make any difference?
I honestly don't think there is, actually. I supported David Lammy's statement recently. I never thought I would, criticising Israel. But I'm afraid Britain has very little influence on Israel. Canada doesn't have much. France, it's America, and it's Trump. And I pray that Trump will finally act, because he's certainly been pressurised by Saudi Arabia and other people. Vance recently cancelled a visit to Israel. I think what we're seeing in Gaza at the moment is one of the greatest crimes against humanity imaginable. And we have to do more, but ultimately it will be the White House that moves this, or if anything's going to change.
So, Heidi, is there more that the government can do? I mean, for example, we formally paused a free trade agreement negotiation with Israel, but then only last week you had Lord Austin, who's our Israel trade envoy, going to Israel saying, I'm here to meet businesses and officials and promote trade with the UK. I mean, which is it?
So we have suspended those negotiations with Israel about a free trade agreement, because we can't deal with the Netanyahu government in a positive way when they're wreaking such appalling destruction and devastation.
So why did Lord Austin go there last week to promote trade?
My understanding was that it was a long-standing commitment, a specific visit to the port of Haifa. This wasn't part of the trade negotiations.
But he was there to promote trade, in his own words.
Look, I think it was a small visit, a low-key visit, and it was not part of any formal negotiations around free trade, because we've suspended that. We have also suspended some of those arms exports to Israel. We have issued sanctions against individuals and organisations who are perpetrating or supporting violence in the West Bank. I saw the news today of the Israeli government authorising new settlements in the West Bank. We should be clear that settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories are illegal. Under international law, they're not permitted. So we oppose that, and I fear that it is deliberately placing an obstacle in the path to finding a two-state solution.
But just briefly, is taking on board what Tim says about the strength of Donald Trump when it comes to negotiating with Israel versus our own, do you think there's more the government can do?
We need to continue to work with our international partners to bring an end to this latest military offensive and to get humanitarian aid in.
It's not good enough. Also, just to be clear, Heidi, I think in 2014 you actually voted to recognise Palestine as a state. I mean, Heidi has been on this for a long time, but I do think that there are many things that the government could do. For example, there are these F-35 jets. David Lammy was in the Commons just a couple of weeks ago saying, well, we can't stop the licences on those because we sell components and that would disrupt global supply chains. Like, can you believe we're talking about global supply chains when there's this many thousands and thousands of children that are dying? Barak, who's the former Prime Minister of Israel, was in the Financial Times over the weekend, and he was talking about how the war is now a project for Netanyahu and about how, they've gone a lot further than they ever should have done. And that is a position that is now softer than where our Labour Prime Minister is. And as someone who's covered Labour politics for going on 10 years and been with these ministers to Palestine meetings and talking about a two-state solution for a decade, I cannot believe this is where we are.
David?
I think certainly when we
what
look
about
at
this business of recognising Palestine as a state? I mean, France and other countries are encouraging the UK to do that. Others say, look, it's largely symbolic. What's the point? What's your feeling? Is that something we should be doing?
So I think we need to look the path to a long-term peace in Gaza and in Palestine more broadly. I think it's very clear that that path is going to require a change of leadership in Gaza, in Palestine, and probably, I think in the view of many of my Jewish constituents, and there are a lot of them, a change in Israel as well. We absolutely support the right of Israel to defend itself. And as Tim described, the act that took place on October the 7th was the most appalling act of barbarism. But there are innocents here. There are the hostages who are being held by Hamas, who need to be released. And then there are the people of Gaza, who in effect are hostages who are caught in a crossfire between Hamas and the Israeli Defence Force. The offer which apparently has been made by the United States to broker a longer-term peace deal offers some hope, in particular, at getting aid into those territories. But as Heidi's described, a decision to pursue more illegal settlements risks putting further obstacles in the way of that path to peace. But we need to make sure that we use our diplomatic efforts. And I have to say, I disagree a bit with Ava on the point about the F-35s. They are being used in Israel. They're also being used to stop Houthi rebels attacking British shipping. So these are part of that international effort that is important in our interests, not just about local interests. But we need that longer-term path to peace to address this.
And Jess, I should say that there are reports tonight, or reports in Israel at any rate, that Benjamin Netanyahu has accepted a US-brokered ceasefire deal. Hamas, at the time of recording this programme, had not yet to respond, and that would release, according to these reports, release 10 hostages, and UN humanitarian aid would go in. We remain to see whether that will happen. Are sanctions the best we can do when it comes to the situation in Gaza? Should we be doing more?
No, we can absolutely do more. And I think Ben was alluding to that actually the Liberal Democrats have been calling for sanctions specifically on Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who are the far-right Israeli ministers who are supporting settlements in the West Bank. We've been calling for that for coming up to 2 years.
But Ben is also saying, is sanctions the best we can do? Is
No, we can also formally recognise Palestine as a state, and that's something that should have happened a long time ago. And I totally agree with Ava when she says that I understand when Keir Starmer stands up in the Commons and says it's complicated, there's a supply chain. Disentangle that supply chain so that those parts are not going to aid the destruction in Gaza.
Let me hear a bit from our audience. We've only got about a minute or so. Yes, the woman in the pink shirt.
Heidi, I feel such a sense of betrayal from the Labour Party. I would never vote Tory, I would never vote UKIP, and I used to vote Labour. Why are you still friends with Israel, an apartheid state? And why is the Labour Party still sending components of F-35 weapons to Israel that are killing, targeting babies, children, hospitals, schools? Enough of this rhetoric about being anti-Semitic if you support Palestinian babies and
Let's let Heidi answer.
I just want to ask Tim something as well.
Well, hang on, because I've only got about 30 seconds left, so I'm going to let Heidi answer. Forgive me.
Please,
if I have time, but I must let Heidi answer that.
We're not sending F-35 components directly to Israel.
You are still sending components of F-35
as much as every single person in this room.
You have reduced weapons by only 8% to Israel. By 8%.
I hear your passion. I must let her answer.
I find it as sickening and as harrowing as every single person in this audience seeing those images on television of children wandering around rubble who are never going to find their parents and who are being starved to death. That is why we have got to find a way of bringing a sustainable solution to the region, a lasting peace, and getting significant humanitarian aid in, because none of us want to wake up tomorrow and see those scenes on our television screens. And I think every single one of us on that panel would agree with that sentiment.
OK. Listen, we will come back to the subject of Gaza. There is no question about that. We've covered it many times, and we will cover it again. And I hear your passion about this subject, and everyone on the panel understands that you feel very strongly about it. We are out of time, I'm afraid, here in Cheltenham. From Question Time this evening, thank you to the panel, thank you to the audience, and, of course, thank you at home for watching. Bye-bye.